OneTaste is a multi-level marketing cult. Yes, there's another one. And it's very important that we talk about this today. And this video is very triggering. So I am giving a trigger warning for sexual assault, sexual abuse, coercion, human trafficking, and forced labor. And everything that's involved with that. PDFs are mentioned. Just trigger warning going forward. It is important that we talk about this topic today because of the way that it's being discussed. You'll see what I mean. Anyway, we'll get right into it. Proceedings have started for the OneTaste orgasmic meditation cult, and I think that we need to talk about it. If you're unfamiliar with this cult, don't go anywhere. We're going to be reading through the Vanity Fair article and discussing the issues with this cult.
Karma's a bitch.
Queen of Karma.
How an orgasmic meditation group sparked a troubled federal case. The sexual wellness company OneTaste was long a San Francisco curiosity, and to some, a cult. Now it is at the center of an unusually fraught criminal trial in Brooklyn. I am here to tell the story of my sister. A woman says as she addresses the camera that she was in a cult and her experience of going through that. The mood is somber, and a title card appears to explain that Aries Blank declined to be interviewed for the 2022 Netflix documentary Orgasm Inc. out of fear of reprisals by OneTaste, a wellness company that some may call a multi-level marketing cult devoted to meditative concept of female stimulation. Instead, her sister Autumn reads aloud from her journals. I remember being told not to go to the hospital, Blank wrote, claiming that she was beaten and sexually assaulted in the course of her activities at the organization. She was told, she continued, that her shaking and vomiting were part of her orgasm. The journal entries provide the opening for a kind of archetypal cult documentary third act, with the other shoe just about to drop. They are also, as Brooklyn federal prosecutors pursuing a criminal case against OneTaste leaders recently acknowledged, to some degree, falsified. Nicole Daedone co-founded OneTaste in San Francisco in 2004. Over the following decades, a period during which alternative health ideas were reaching mainstream saturation, she became the face of orgasmic meditation, a mindfulness practice in which a partner, typically a man, strokes a woman's clitoris for 15 minutes. In press coverage of OneTaste, the word cult appeared intermittently. Participants sometimes lived together in communes devoted to Daedone's teachings, until a 2018 Bloomberg report on the company was published and a criminal investigation began, though she was largely treated with a shifting mix of fascination and skepticism. At that point, Daedone underwent a late 2010s arc familiar to any observer of the streaming era's cult documentary boom. The year after Orgasm Inc. was released, and OneTaste became known to Netflix's vast audience, prosecutors charged Daedone and her longtime head of sales, Rachel Sherwitz, with a count of forced labor conspiracy. They claimed that, among other forms of coercion and surveillance, the women exploited their employees and participants' histories of sexual trauma to obtain control over their time, money, and willingness to perform sexual acts. Daedone, who sold her stake in OneTaste and stepped down as CEO in 2017, and Sherwitz, who left the company in 2018, have pleaded not guilty. For legal purposes, in this video, everything is alleged. And this is a Vanity Fair article. Do them instead. Not me. I'm little. In March of 2025, with a trial date soon approaching, the government made a jarring concession. Blank's handwritten journal entries, which formed central evidence in the case, had been physically copied from an electronic file created years later. Lawyers for Daedone and Sherwitz had for months been arguing that the diaries were fabricated for Netflix's purposes, noting including that the streamer paid Blank's sister $25,000 for use of her archival materials. The prosecutor, who had been vouching for the authenticity of the journals, left the case. The government has had a full turnover of its prosecutors over the period between indictment and trial. The evidence was thrown out, and Blank was no longer set to be called as a witness. A spokesperson for Netflix declined to comment. Blank's sister and a lawyer who has represented Blank did not return requests for comment. OneTaste paid Blank a $325,000 settlement in 2015, but has denied that she was beaten or sexually assaulted in connection with her employment or courses she took. Why'd you pay the settlement then, huh? The trial's opening arguments began on Tuesday, but Daedone had already been on the offensive. Aside from OneTaste suing Netflix for defamation, the complaint was dismissed by a judge, but OneTaste is appealing. Daedone has posted videos of her supporters, a sizable group of women, walking in unison outside the Brooklyn courthouse where she is being tried. She has conducted a spirited PR campaign following the prosecution's backtracking on Blank's journals. A Daily Mail headline declared that the case heaters on the brink of collapse. In several interviews, including one I conducted with her last month at Organic Erotic, a home goods store in Harlem, affiliated with the orgasmic meditation community, Daedone has vowed that she will testify in her own defense. First they call you a kook, then they say you're a danger to society, Daedone said, comparing the treatment she had received to that of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Then they dig into your history, and then they move into legal. And it was like, wow, that's what happened. In 2009, a Berkeley couple wrote to the New York Times regarding a splashy story the paper had just published about OneTaste. Ilana Auerbach had been a resident of the company's original commune, and, as she stated in her initial account to the Times, had given her self-image and internal compass over to Daedone. In a letter to the editor, Auerbach and her husband went further. We found the environment manipulative, unhealthy, and disempowering. They wrote, groupthink and the threat of being shunned were used to coerce people to adopt the dominant viewpoint. Very worrisome behavior. Auerbach has maintained this conviction up until the present day, including in an appearance in Orgasm Inc. In January, she published an essay in the Sunday Times, writing of Daedone. I realized I had become her servant, just like the others. To prepare for a OneTaste ritual that involved lying naked on a table for an audience, she wrote, she needed to sign up for a course that cost $15,000. A company spokesperson told the Times that Daedone and OneTaste firmly dispute Auerbach's portrayal, which appears to be meticulously designed for dramatic effect. That's a quote from them. And notice how it's courses, and then people are also being taught how to teach this to other people. Such accounts, in their broad view of Daedone's power over OneTaste participants' sexuality and finances, are at the core of prosecutors' case. The indictment invokes an alleged pattern of abusive and manipulative tactics that entailed absolute commitment to Daedone and rendered members emotionally, socially, and psychological dependent on OneTaste. Daedone explained as we spoke that orgasmic meditation is an attention training practice that uses sexual energies but is not itself sexual. She saw her work in a lineage with yoga, Buddhism, and psychedelics, sources of previous American panics that won acceptance as time passed and attitudes loosened. Relaxed and gregarious, she held unflinching eye contact and flitted freely between references to Schopenhauer and Andrea Dworkin. At the peak of her success, Daedone was neither in the shadows nor extraordinarily prominent. In the world of celebrity-adjacent wellness, brushes she had with Gwyneth Paltrow and Khloe Kardashian could be viewed as akin to table stakes. Her rise has always involved a degree of intrigue in her backstory. In her 20s, she told me, she worked as a stripper for a time at the recommendation of an academic friend who was doing so. Around the same period, she has said, she learned shortly before her estranged father's death that he had cancer and that he was in prison after being convicted of child molestation. Orgasm Inc. includes footage from a Daedone talk in which she discussed her reaction to the revelation.
I never took on the idea that he was a bad person,
she said. Okay. He touched a child.
I took on the idea that he was just so expansive and fourth dimensional that he couldn't confine himself into the arbitrary laws of the third dimension. That was his only crime in my mind.
Okay, lady. When I asked if there were moments when she felt OneTaste had veered off course, Daedone said that some of her commentary in this vein, in its accommodating analysis of male culpability amid the #MeToo movement,
was a place where I really misread the room.
Though it had seemed to her a given that
women have power and agency, and that we are inherently in a form of subjugation.
The case against OneTaste has attracted attention from some specific frequencies on the ideological spectrum. In February, the libertarian magazine Reason published a lengthy deconstruction of the charges, accusing prosecutors of relying merely on salaciousness, scandal, and the all too familiar sense that female sexuality is something to be suppressed and controlled by the state. Matt Gaetz, at a moment when Donald Trump supporters have become increasingly fluent in discussions of lawfare, bemoaned FBI overreach in a recent segment on his One America News show and weighed in on orgasmic meditation. I posit no theory on the efficaciousness of these purported remedies, Gaetz said, but I don't know. After being poisoned, lied to, and deprived of my rights by Big Pharma, I'm probably more open-minded about alternative naturopath therapies than I was years ago. OneTaste had the seeming makings of a cult, Daedone conceded, except for a nefarious intention. But she thought that common perception had been shaped by the terms' loose use.
Once you use those words, then people's cognitive ability goes down.
Now get a load of this. Daedone's publicist, Judah Engelmeyer, who was sitting by her side, chimed in. Ultra-Orthodox Judaism, it's cultish, he said, not a crime. Daedone tracked Engelmeyer down in 2018 after she read a news story that was relatively favorable toward his client, Harvey Weinstein. The day before we spoke, Engelmeyer had attended the opening of the producer's retrial on rape and criminal sex act charges. Weinstein has pleaded not guilty and denied all allegations of sexual misconduct against him. He has also recently represented Aussie Media co-founder Carlos Watson, who was sentenced in December to nearly 10 years in prison for defrauding investors, but saw his term commuted by Trump after Engelmeyer facilitated a sequence of connections to the president's pardon czar. A New York Times reporter has been trailing Engelmeyer for a profile, and the spokesman observed that his work on behalf of embattled public figures had hit a turning point in recent years. Slowly but surely, he said, the Johnny Depp trial with Amber Heard. I think that might have broken the cork. Under their bail conditions, Sherwitz told me in a separate interview, she and Daedone were not allowed to be in the same place at the same time. Before she was indicted, she said the government had approached her through her attorneys as a potential victim.
It's like they were coming to brainwash me,
she said,
or somehow coerce me to fit into their narrative.
At 19, Sherwitz moved to Israel and practiced Orthodox Judaism for 5 years. Later, she said, she was diagnosed as unorgasmic and couldn't find suitable help within the medical community. At an Iyengar yoga class, a teacher told her about OneTaste. I'm losing so badly in my life right now. I should try this, she remembered thinking, and it spoke to me in a pretty deep way. In an October court filing, the government laid out its position in more detail. The overall portrait centered on a persistent advocacy for more sex, including instances in which the defendants allegedly taught employees to engage in sexual acts that they found uncomfortable or repulsive as a means of expanding their horizons, ensuring that the OneTaste participants would continue to have sex with strangers for Daedone's financial benefit. According to prosecutors, Daedone and Sherwitz directed women to have sex with wealthy potential clients. In her opening statement on Tuesday, Daedone's attorney, Jennifer Bonjean, who also represents Weinstein, of course, among other high-profile men accused of sexual misconduct, said, "Grown people made grown decisions they don't want to stand by." The accusations could be construed as allegations of sex trafficking, which had initially been a focus of the FBI's investigation into OneTaste. But as lawyers for Daedone and Sherwitz noted in a reply filing, the government did not bring any charges for that severity. Gee, I wonder why the US government would not charge them with that, with all those connections they have. Wow, weird, huh? Engelmayer has been empathetic about communicating to reporters that the case against OneTaste, to his and his defense attorneys' knowledge, marks the first time that forced labor conspiracy has been charged as a standalone count, without an accompanying crime that would typically represent an instance in which the conspiracy, an agreement to commit the crime, was enacted. A spokesperson for the Eastern District of New York's U.S. Attorney's Office declined to comment. When Frank Parlato first read about OneTaste in 2018, he was convinced that something was amiss. It was what looked like familiar territory. For a brief period beginning in 2007, Parlato worked as a publicist for NXIVM, then a little-known self-help organization. A decade later, after turning his attention to reporting for his website, The Frank Report, he played an early role in revealing that his old boss, Keith Raniere, had operated a sex cult. In 2020, Raniere was sentenced to 120 years in prison for racketeering and sex trafficking, among other crimes. NXIVM was a multi-level marketing scheme that I covered extensively on my channel. In addition to his NXIVM and OneTaste coverage, another recent Parlato fixation in his claim that Jerry Sandusky, the former Penn State football coach, convicted of serial child molestation, was railroaded. After Engelmayer approached him about OneTaste, Parlato told me, "I made a very serious news-gathering effort in an investigation to determine whether they were being fairly or, in my opinion, unfairly prosecuted." In his coverage, he has described the case in his hyperkinetic, house-style writing. Parlato lives rent-free in prosecutors' heads, while actual evidence lives nowhere. Prosecutors have claimed OneTaste paid Parlato $20,000 per month for his coverage. Parlato has written that OneTaste retained him to investigate the prosecution. Engelmayer said the agreement lasted a few months and that Parlato continued writing about the case afterwards. Parlato proposed to me that the OneTaste case amounted to criminalizing regret. He compared participants' lodging allegations to going to Harvard and later realizing that the education hadn't been as valuable as expected. As he sees it, the charges brought in the same jurisdiction as those against Raniere are simply an attempt at bringing about another high-profile cult case, or as he described it, NXIVM 2.0. For their part, 20 Brooklyn prosecutors appeared at a recent pretrial hearing in a show of support. The prosecutor who led the investigation of Raniere, Moira Penza, who left the U.S. Attorney's Office in 2019, told me that she found a few aspects of the case against Daedone and Sherwitz unusual. The government had pursued a novel strategy, lost a key witness and evidence at the finish line, and swapped out all its prosecutors on the case. Keith Raniere wasn't doing TED Talks and appearing in South by Southwest and talking to Gwyneth Paltrow, Penza said, describing Daedone's media profile. What does that have to do with anything? Cults talk to high-profile people all the time and sign them up to legitimize themselves. Are you telling me that because Tom Cruise is famous in Hollywood and he's in Scientology, now Scientology is not a cult? Seriously? Fuck off. Penza emphasized that she had no reason to think that her former office had acted improperly in pursuing the charges, with its trial strategy still to be seen, or that it could not secure a conviction. Jurors wouldn't necessarily wonder, "Oh, well, why didn't they charge this the way they charged NXIVM?" she said. She also thinks that since Daedone's initial rise, there are more people who are very skeptical of the way wellness can be used to exploit women. Why are we even comparing this to NXIVM? I'm sorry, is NXIVM the only sex cult that's allowed to exist? Are you upsetty spaghetti that other victims are getting justice? What's wrong with you? Still, Penza said, as a former prosecutor, I can tell you, you don't want to be trying a case with those things stacked against you. Now, I do think they should get their ducks in a row so that they can ensure that they throw these people in jail, but this is all very weird. For the last several years, Daedone told me, as she dealt with the media and legal fallout around OneTaste, she has been focused on preparing for her trial and keeping up her meditation practice. On social media, which she should also not be allowed to be on and have, she has been weighing in on pop culture discussions of women's sexuality, including those surrounding Bianca Censori's displays of nudity and Bonnie Blue's pornography stunts. I am not a martyr, Daedone insisted, but she understands her struggle in a broader sense as something more telling about the culture than it is about me in a lot of ways. As we discussed the circumstances leading up to her indictment, I asked if it was fair to characterize OneTaste participants as seekers. She had an instant reaction and a partial objection. The term had a diminishing connotation. They were almost invariably someone who had touched something, Daedone said, or had a sense that something more was possible. Yeah, it sounds like you made people touch each other even if they didn't want to. And that's worrisome. A lot of people keep comparing this cult to NXIVM, which is kind of problematic. And it's also problematic to state that because the cult was run by women and they made it about female sexuality, therefore it wasn't sexual assault. Women can sexually assault women. Women can sexually traffic people. Women can also run cults. This is a very, very problematic viewpoint to have. And I need to ask the world to shut up and stop doing this. Do not compare the cults to try to lessen how bad OneTaste was. World's worrying me a bit here. Nicole Daedone had turned herself in June of 2023 and pleaded not guilty to a charge of manipulating traumatized people into debt, undesired sex, and underpaid work. And yeah, she can do that even as a woman. You don't have to be a man to do that. Stop with the sexism. She was released on a $1 million bond, probably because she was a woman, secured by her mother's partner, and a OneTaste ally. But you'll notice at the top of this article here, it says, there's some similarities, but there's some key differences. OneTaste was founded and run by women. This was very much a matriarchal type company and organization, and it was focused on female sexuality. I don't see how that lessens it. And it seems like people are using these things to claim that the harm that she did to everyone in this cult, isn't as bad. And it's very dangerous to start comparing people's traumas like this. And especially by the courts. I'm very worried. This is not good. I've been covering multi-level marketing cults and other cults on my channel since 2019. So for going on 6 years now. And one of the biggest comments that I get are people downplaying the harm of these commercial cults. They say things to me like, oh, queen, just go talk about your little businesses. These things are not harmful. They don't take everything from people. They don't manipulate. They don't start compounds. They don't turn into sex cults. This is the second multi-level marketing company that I have seen turn into a sex cult right before our eyes. And part of the reason is because multi-level marketing is socially acceptable. It is seen as something that stay-at-home moms and veteran wives and disabled people who can't work outside of the home should be grateful to have the opportunity to be a part of something that can make them some money instead of the dangerous cults that they are and the gateway to extremely harmful behaviors. OneTaste and NXIVM would have never turned into sex cults if multi-level marketing was illegal. If multi-level marketing was seen as pyramid schemes, it would be easier for us to shut these companies down like we try to before they get to that point. It is time that we start being proactive out here instead of reactive. And it's frustrating because right now, The government is doing everything that they possibly can to ensure that these businesses are seen as legal. Businesses that force people to work for not even minimum wage, not even pennies, but they aren't protected by the labor laws. So you see, it's a loophole that capitalism uses to harm the public consumers and vulnerable people to get them to work for these large corporations under the guise that they're helping people and that they'll be able to be successful from them, when we all know that less than 1% of people get success from these. You actually have a better chance of winning the lottery than you do of finding success in an MLM. And it's just very angering to see how this is downplayed. Another thing is that OneTaste was an MLM. And so I just want to quickly go through what OneTaste was and just have a little talk about what you can do to protect yourself from these things. Because we cannot shy away from the fact that this was an MLM company. It wasn't just this cult, it's an MLM company that then turns into a compound and a cult. They have to start somewhere. So in summary, OneTaste was founded in 2004 by Nicole Daedone, a charismatic leader who promoted a practice called orgasmic meditation, OM. She claimed it could heal trauma, unlock feminine power, and even lead to spiritual enlightenment. Daedone was often presented as a visionary, blending mindfulness with sexuality, but critics say she ran a manipulative, high-pressure group rooted in exploitation. At the core of OneTaste was OM, a practice where, mostly male, partners would stimulate, mostly female, partners for 15 minutes under the guise of spiritual growth. It was marketed as a healing tool and gateway to personal freedom. Members were encouraged to take expensive courses, optimize their lives through OM, and devote themselves entirely to the teachings. Alongside workshops, retreats, and memberships, they offered coaching programs that promised personal transformation, healing from trauma, and improved relationships. These coaching programs were often very expensive, with some packages costing tens of thousands of dollars. Here's how the coaching aspect worked. Students were encouraged to become coaches themselves by enrolling in OneTaste advanced training programs. These programs included titles like Leadership Program or Intensive Coaching Program, which trained people to sell OM and OneTaste philosophy to others. Coaches were taught high-pressure sales tactics to recruit new clients, often pressuring people to max out credit cards or drain savings to pay for courses. The company created a multi-level marketing style structure where coaches were both clients and salespeople. Harmful tactics included, but were not limited to, high-pressure sales of courses costing thousands of dollars, love bombing followed by financial and sexual coercion, isolation from families and outside influence, forced labor under the guise of training, unpaid work justified as devotion or commitment, manipulative consent practices involving sexual acts. Allegations of grooming and abuse have surfaced from former members. The controversies are: a major FBI investigation was launched into OneTaste in 2018 for allegations of sex trafficking, labor law violations, and prostitution. The 2022 Netflix documentary, Orgasm Inc., The Story of OneTaste, exposed the group's coercive tactics and manipulation. Multiple former members reported being traumatized, manipulated into sex work, and pressured into silence through NDAs. So how do you protect yourself from something like this? Be wary of any group demanding large sums of money for spiritual or emotional healing. Watch for signs of coercion disguised as empowerment. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't sign NDAs for self-improvement programs. Look for peer-reviewed research and independent reviews of any wellness claims. And for more information on how to protect yourself from cults such as this, make sure that you subscribe to my channel. Alright, well, thank you so much for going on this journey with me. These are all my thoughts about this so far. Let me know your comments down below. I do want to hear what you have to say about how this is being handled. Are you as worried as I am? Am I being ridiculous? Is Vanity Fair being ridiculous? What is going on? What should we do to help this situation going forward? How do we speak out enough to stop this from happening? Let me know all your thoughts down below. Again, happy MLM Monday, and I'll see you all really soon with another one. I love all your faces. Bye!
Queen of Karma.